Hi, folks. This is Katie Rice, welcoming you to our meeting on the 1251 South Alicio project. And this meeting is specifically for parents and families from the Kentfield School District, as well as the Ross Valley Nursery School and Marin Enrichment, and staff as well. But it's just 6 o'clock now, and I'm seeing people trickling in, as it were, to the Zoom. So I'm going to wait a few minutes to formally start. So it'll be just be a few minutes. Good evening, folks. We're just letting people join in. It's 6:02. I'm going to give it till just a couple more minutes to make sure that folks who wanted to join are here from the top. All right. So Andrew, are you the background tech person?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. All right, great. Okay. So folks, we're going to get going. My name is Katie Rice, for those of you who I have not met or in person or on some Zoom over the last couple of years. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is a meeting specifically for Kentfield School District parents and staff, as well as the Ross Valley Nursery School parents and staff and Marin Enrichment. I want to thank Superintendent Raquel Rose for working with my office to arrange this Zoom meeting. There was a presentation made to the Kentfield School District Board last month by staff on the Alicio project, but we wanted to make sure we presented something or created a forum specifically for the local school parents and families, because, you know, obviously lots of interest and concerns around this home keep project. So that's what this Zoom is. And before I turn it over to Raquel, just for a couple welcoming remarks from her, I want to just let folks know what the meeting format is going to be. So we've got a presentation that is no more than 30 minutes, maybe a little less, and it will provide some just background and context for how Marin County is working on homelessness in Marin, and then how this home keep project fits into it. And then there'll also be details specifically about the Alicio project, the Home Key Alicio project. We'll also include, as part of the presentation, answers to some of the most frequently asked questions that we're getting. just so maybe we can answer some questions right off the top for people. And then the bulk of the meeting, we're going to turn over to folks who are attending to ask your questions or make comments, and then leave time at the end to respond to those questions. We have folks from Episcopal Community Services. Would be the operator owner of this project. We have folks from the county, our county staff, our homeless staff, and we want to make sure that we're able to respond to all the questions that do get asked, and hear your comments as well. And as I said at the top, really appreciate you being here, appreciate the interest and the concerns, and really want to make sure that we're able to be responsive to you tonight. So with that, Andrew, if you could pull in Superintendent Rose. I'm going to turn the mic over to her for 1 second. Good evening, Raquel.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you. Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, so I don't know, Andrew, if you're going to promote me as a panelist briefly. I'll just hold out for a minute.
Yeah.
Yes, let me do that for you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Let's see. Okay, promoting now.
Thanks.
It might not be working while you're talking, so let me remove that and then try again. Okay, I think.
You got to bring her back in, Andrew, as a.
Yeah, let me see. It's not showing I'm clicking promote, but it's not working. So maybe we'll just go to back to allow to talk.
Raquel?
Yeah,
yeah, you're on. We're not getting the video working, which I'm sorry about.
That's okay. That's okay.
Anyway, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry about those technical difficulties, and but I appreciate getting the opportunity just to speak real briefly. So first and foremost, I want to extend my absolute appreciation for your team putting this on tonight. It's great to work with your staff on coordinating. Also, thank you to Episcopal Community Services for being in attendance to share information. You know, this is something that is really important to our community to have their voices be heard tonight. So I appreciated hearing how this is going to be set up, and that there will be ample time to hear directly from the residents and employees in the area, particularly in this area. And additional feedback I received was just an interest in getting some real clarity and precision around the questions that have come forward. And some of those questions, which I shared with your team members, was around the profile and background of the candidates that may be housed in this initiative. Also giving some more information related to, you know, why this specific location, because it is nestled in a residential area, just wondering that that's such an anomaly piece of this place. And so just, is there any room to further think about it being a family housing unit versus an individual housing unit? And I guess the last piece that I want to touch on that I'm hoping to be addressed this evening is, as your team and Episcopal Community Services are planning, are there proactive steps being taken to specifically address any issues that might come up related to safety mitigation, vandalism, or property damage that may happen? So just the hope that we can hear some more clarity around those areas. And I also just want to acknowledge that this evening our board president received a communication from a community member that had 30+ questions and some additional alternative options to think about. And so I want to extend appreciation to those members of the community that generated those questions, and appreciation to your team in the attempt to try to answer that. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of information we're going to get to hear tonight. And I guess I'll close with saying that, I feel very fortunate to get to serve as a superintendent in the Kentfield School District. And our primary focus and goal is on the academic and social emotional wellness of our children. And that one of those components of that is being sure that our children have a safe route to school. And if in any way that might be compromised or be changed in some way, it's so very important that our staff is proactively engaged in how that planning goes, as well as our community, so their voices can be heard. So again, I just appreciate the time that you all put into putting together tonight's event. I appreciate your willingness to let our community have their voices be heard as the planning continues to evolve. So thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. Really appreciate those comments. And also with regards to the 30 questions that came in, if we don't get to them all tonight, we can find a way to get responses to them out to you and to the community, included in the FAQ. So we'll do our best there. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn the program over to Andrew Henning, who's from Opening Doors Marin, who an organization that the county is working with just on our community outreach and engagement. And he's going to provide a presentation on this project and within the context of our work on homelessness in Marin County. And off we go. All right. Good evening, Andrew. Thanks for doing double duty, tech man and presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Supervisor Rice. And I think I might only be batting 500 at this point. So hopefully the presentation goes a little more smoothly. Sorry again, Raquel. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here for a presentation that we're going to give to you tonight. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Andrew Henning. I'm the project director with Opening Doors Marin. And really, for the beginning of this presentation, a lot of the questions that have come in have related to, I think, our overall strategy around addressing homelessness in Marin. Who are we serving? Why are we serving them the way that we are? So we wanted to give you a brief overview of what our strategy is, because it has changed quite a bit over the past few years. And really, it started in 2016. So to potentially oversimplify what's a very complex challenge, what we came to learn back at that time was that homelessness can really be seen as a spectrum. And for the vast majority of people that experience homelessness, it's actually a relatively brief experience lasting a few short weeks or months. And it's primarily driven by economic issues such as a job loss or an eviction, other crises in one's life, like a health crisis or perhaps a domestic violence situation. But again, this homelessness can resolve itself relatively quickly with somewhat minimal assistance. However, for a smaller group of people experiencing what's called long-term chronic homelessness, homelessness can last a lot longer. It can last years. In some cases, it can last decades. And it's often exacerbated by disabling conditions of some type. That might be medical. It could be a traumatic brain injury. It could be a behavioral health issue. But that's really the kind of full gamut of people that might be experiencing homelessness in our community. So what we came to realize back in 2016 is that we were serving a lot of people that were in this part of the curve, the temporary and episodic. And we continue to help a lot of people that are in this part of the curve, but we weren't doing a great job helping people experiencing chronic homelessness. So to address this, we got our policymakers together and our elected leaders. We went on field trips throughout the region, up to Sonoma, down to Silicon Valley, to the East Bay. And we really learned what other communities were doing to address chronic homelessness. At the same time, we also tried to start mapping our own local system of care. So the details of this map are less important than the conceptual aspect of it, which is that homelessness is denoted in the middle, permanent housing is denoted on the outside. And as you can see, we had a lot of programs serving a lot of people, but we had unintentionally created this circuitous path that many people experiencing long-term chronic homelessness were not ending up in permanent housing. And the result was that we'd sort of created this vicious cycle over, again, decades of policy in the community, where we had the most at-risk folks. They were failing out of our programs. Again, this wasn't intentional, but we just had barriers that were preventing people from being successful. Because of that, they were becoming more distrustful of the system. They weren't seeking help, and then their situation got worse. And as I mentioned, there were people when we first started this who had been experiencing homelessness in Marin for 20, 30, even one person, 40 years off and on homelessness in Marin. And so obviously the system wasn't working for them, and it wasn't working that we weren't able to get that person back inside. So what we realized in visiting other communities is that we didn't need just another program catering to some specific subpopulation. What we needed was a whole new strategy and process for recognizing the unique needs of individual people. And when we visited San Mateo, they had launched San Mateo County. They had launched a program back around 2010 that was designed to address chronic homelessness in the city of San Mateo. And it was called the Homeless Outreach Team. And the idea was that you bring together city leaders, county leaders, service providers, you bring together frontline staff, executive staff, and you work together on a by name list to try to house the most vulnerable people in the community. And they had incredible success. In fact, they virtually ended chronic homelessness in San Mateo, the city. And we thought that this could be a great program for Marin. So in 2016, we piloted our own version of this. And you can see this is our early meetings. And it was focused on downtown San Rafael. And we got together all those stakeholders and we focused on the most vulnerable people experiencing long-term homelessness in downtown San Rafael. Once we identified who those folks were, we needed to figure out how to house them. And that was really a big difference for us. So if you've heard of the term housing first, that was also when we were starting to first learn about housing first and begin to embrace it locally. And so I think the important way to think about housing first is that compared to that maze of services that I showed you a little bit ago, that's sort of the status quo of managing homelessness. Housing first is supporting people and going directly from the experience of homelessness into housing with, importantly, wraparound support services. And I will say, because I know it can seem counterintuitive that might work. In fact, I spent half of my career in workforce development. And when I first learned about housing first, I didn't think it was possible to have success around that. But really, the data has shown that it is the most effective way to help people experiencing long-term homelessness. Just last year, the University of California, San Francisco, which is one of the most famed research institutions in the world, did rolled out the results of a double-blind study that they conducted on a housing first intervention in Santa Clara County between 2015 and 2019. And it found that rather than the status quo, which again, I showed you was that sort of maze of trying to navigate existing services, housing first led to 86% long-term housing retention compared to 33% of the status quo approach. So these results have been replicated many, many times across the country and was a powerful data point for us to understand that maybe there's a better way to serve folks that have that level of need. And then I think more than just the data was what we observed. We actually started having success. In the first 18 months of the Homeless Outreach Team, we housed 23 of the most vulnerable long-term homeless folks in downtown San Rafael. And because of this, we began to ask ourselves, could this pilot actually become a county-wide strategy for addressing homelessness? So in 2017, we began to look around the country and try to understand if other communities have found a way to do this. And in fact, there was a way to do this. There's now a national movement, it's actually international, called Built for Zero, which is led by a nonprofit called Community Solutions. And Built for Zero is now a coalition of over 80 communities across the United States and Canada that are implementing these by name list, what are called coordinated entry systems to help end chronic and veteran homelessness. And again, back around 2017, 2018, Marin joined Built for Zero, and we officially launched our own coordinated entry system on October 1st of 2017. Since then, it's been a little over 4 years. We've had a pretty significant impact. So looking at just the past 6 months, you can see that on average, we are now housing about a dozen people experiencing chronic homelessness every month. We've now housed over 400 people, and our retention rate for all of these people that we've housed is around 94%. And so again, when you think about the study from earlier through UCSF that showed 86%, we're actually even higher than a really great program down in the South Bay. So really, that's kudos to our local service providers. The other thing, and this has come up quite a bit, is to what extent is this system actually working with people that are experiencing homelessness locally? There is a bit of a mythology around this idea of non-local homelessness. There's something called the homeless point in time count, which is a census done every odd year of people experiencing homelessness all across the country. And in the Bay Area, across the 9 Bay Area counties, studies consistently find that anywhere from 70 to 85%, even 87% in Sonoma County, of people experiencing homelessness in a local community or in a county lost their housing in that county. So the same holds true for Marin. The folks that we're working with are really people that have lost their housing in Marin and have been in our community for a long time and have just not gotten the help that they need. So that's a lot of information for me. But again, this is a much bigger, more robust system. And so to get a better sense of some of the partners that are involved, as well as to see some of the folks that have been impacted by this system, I'm going to go ahead and play a short video for you that's going to tell you a little bit more about the system.
This is where I used to live, right here. I was chronically homeless, been homeless for years. I felt like I'd been thrown away by society.
I felt that I'd really screwed up in life, and this is my punishment.
I just didn't know how I was going to get from point A to point B. The gap was enormous that needed to be bridged, and I couldn't do it on my own.
I went by myself and I was praying and just singing over and over again, I can't do this anymore, I can't do this anymore, God help me.
I've been doing this job for 5 years, and when I started, it was difficult to coordinate care from the different agencies and from the county because we weren't talking to each other.
We're able to now help somebody with their housing. We're able to help them with their health care. We're able to help them with their behavioral health needs. We can help them with their social needs, help them to get income. We can do all of that with one team.
I think that partnership is important because no one organization can do this alone. It's a really strong and ever-growing team of partners that are coming to the table to address this issue of homelessness.
We went on some field trips to go and see what other departments or cities had done or counties and brought back some of those practices to Marin.
Placing people into housing is the first step in healthcare. So we're going to end up saving the system money and providing a level of care and support to these folks who most need it.
Giving them the dignity of having a place to live, take a shower, cook a meal, have a safe place to visit with a friend or have a family member over. Something that really means something to us.
We all want to see people be placed in a position where they get to thrive and be a productive citizen.
The platform that they provide gives people the opportunity to rebuild their life.
I cannot believe that I finally have a car in the driveway and have a place to live.
Without that, I would have failed. I would still be caught up in that struggle of chronic homelessness.
Being treated like you're a real person means the world.
I'm completely in a sustainable situation now. You know, I will not become homeless again.
So as you can see, as I mentioned, and hopefully you could see in the video, we really do have a very robust system that we've created over the last few years. Includes the Ritter Center, St. Vincent de Paul, Homeward Bound and Marin, the Housing Authority, the county, and we've really come together. So I just want to convey again that, you know, this is an individual project and opportunity that we're talking about, but it really is part of a much larger ecosystem of providers that are all working very closely together in a way that we were not, honestly, just a few years ago. So just briefly, you know, the question that we usually get after this is, well, how are you housing so many people? And it's really the perfect segue to why we're here this evening. The reality is that actually the vast majority of the people that we've housed over the last 4 or 5 years have been through scattered site rental units through something called a housing voucher. So that's not free housing. If someone gets a housing voucher or gets into any supportive housing program, they pay 30% of their income towards the rent, and then a subsidy pays the rest up to market rate. So most people that we've housed have been in these scattered site rental units, whether it's individuals or families. And we've housed people, you know, from Mill Valley up to Novato, Corte Madera, as far west as Inverness. So this has been our primary strategy for housing people across the county. We do know at some point we're going to run out of willing landlords and rental units. And so we've also been working to try to create actual new built units. So just last year, this Victory Village project opened in Fairfax. Right now, as we speak, Homeward Bound is completing the Mill Street 2.0 rebuild in San Rafael, which will have 32 units of permanent supportive housing on site. Last year through Project Home Key, we acquired this property in Corte Madera, what we're calling the Casa Buena, which is 18 units. And then last year through Home Key, we also acquired 3301 Kerner, which is was an office building in San Rafael, also about 44 units. So again, just a little bit of context of some of the housing efforts that we have going on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the county, Ashley Hart McIntyre, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the Home Key opportunity, as well as a little bit more about the vision for the program. So Ashley, I will turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Hart McIntyre, Homelessness Policy Analyst with Marin County Health and Human Services, and I'm happy to be here to tell you a little bit about what we are working on. So go ahead, next slide, Andrew. The current round of Home Key funding makes $1.4 billion available across the state with a $200 million Bay Area set aside. We're competing against a lot of really well-funded and well-put-together projects across the Bay Area, and points are awarded on project feasibility as well as a number of other criteria. The site that we're talking about this evening has its issues. It's a little run down, but it has the bones and it has the layout necessary to accommodate a quick renovation. We have applied to the state for the project already. We expect to hear in December if we are successful in our application. If we are, the Board of Supervisors would have to act to appropriate the funds necessary to close on the property. Next slide. Thus far, our process has consisted of the following items. We conducted 10 community meetings in the spring of 2021 in anticipation of a release of notice of funding availability from the state for this funding opportunity. We issued a request for information in April to identify prospective properties. We also released a request for qualifications in May to identify a development sponsor. Episcopal Community Services, who's also here with us tonight, was selected in that competition. Go ahead to the next slide, please. ECS has a long history of success in developing and managing permanent supportive housing projects. They manage 1,600 units of permanent supportive housing and maintain a 95% housing retention rate. They've conducted extensive due diligence on roughly 20 sites across Marin, including the South Alicio site, which is the property that made the most sense based on the Home Key requirements, which are extensive, and the funding available. And at the end of September, the county and city of Larkspur, along with Episcopal Community Services, issued a joint press release to announce the intent to pursue the South Alicio site. Go ahead for the next slide. This is the site that we're talking about at 1251 South Alicio. Next slide. Our vision, we are developing apartment homes. This will not be a shelter, a navigation center, or any kind of transitional site. People will live here. It will be their place of security and peace after years of trauma and homelessness. We envision that redevelopment of the site will result in a driver's by noticing nothing different about this property compared to any of the other properties in the neighborhood. And we will work with a community advisory committee on the building's exterior and design to ensure that it's a fit with the neighborhood aesthetics. Next slide. As you can see, this is the property as it currently stands. It has fallen into disrepair, and almost the only way to go from here is up. So any redevelopment, I think, will be a lovely improvement to this property. Next slide, thank you. How will residents be selected? We select residents for permanent supportive housing in Marin based on what we call our coordinated entry system. It includes representatives from all of Marin's primary homeless service providers and housing providers. It manages the process of tracking everybody who is experiencing chronic homelessness in Marin and connects them to the appropriate level of housing. The units are not available on the open market, and the coordinated entry committee will make referrals to any open spots. Next slide. The site will house single adults who have experienced chronic homelessness. Each tenant will have a disabling condition, and that is the reason that the services that will be provided at the site are so critical. Next slide. We want to talk a little bit more detail about families. Housing families experiencing homelessness is a major priority for us here in the county. It was seriously considered for this site. However, this is a former skilled nursing facility. It has single rooms. The building would require extensive reconfiguration to ensure that the apartments are large enough for families and have the amenities necessary and appropriate for families with children. And that would include full kitchens and full private baths. It was considerably more expensive and very likely not possible at all to actually execute that design within the timeline required to receive home key funding. For your information, we have about 12 months, we have exactly 12 months from the date of award to complete all renovations, and that's award, not actually closing on the property. So we're actually looking at a renovation timeline of significantly shorter than 1 year. And then additionally, there's significant need for permanent supportive housing for single adults experiencing chronic homelessness. We have about 600 across the county and a much smaller number of chronically homeless families. Next slide. To give you a little bit of a better idea of what a permanent supportive housing project looks like and who the residents might be, this is a picture of residents from another permanent supportive housing project elsewhere in Marin. Next slide, thank you. The project will be thoroughly staffed. It'll be staffed with case managers at a ratio low enough to allow for frequent client interactions. We use a 1:17 staff to client ratio, which is lower than most other communities across the Bay Area and is appropriate for folks who do have significant disabilities. There will be mental health services, counseling, benefits advocacy, financial literacy support, food, transportation assistance, employment development, and community building activities. We'll wrap all of those services around residents to help them stabilize and thrive in their new location. We measure success of a project through housing stability and through improved health and well-being of residents, as well as overall community integration. There will be professional third-party property management who has experience with permanent supportive housing. There will be a 24/7 front desk staff person, and a resident manager will live on site. There will also be a community ambassador program that will co-design with the Community Advisory Committee. We'll describe the process for nomination to the Community Advisory Committee in a little bit. The residents of the property will have the standard rights and responsibilities that any tenant in any apartment might have, and they will pay rent. Folks who are in these units will pay 30% of their income toward rent, and vouchers from the Housing Authority will make up the remainder of the rent. Next slide. To give you a little bit of a further idea of what a permanent supportive housing project itself might look like, we have a few photos from current Episcopal Community Services projects to share with you. Next slide. And next slide. We've gotten a lot of questions from the community about this project. We've developed a robust FAQ page on the website, which is 1251salicio.com. And we're going to review a number of those FAQs now before we move to public comment. I'm going to introduce Beth Stokes, the Executive Director of Episcopal Community Services, to tackle the first set of FAQs.
Thanks so much, Beth Stokes, Executive Director of Episcopal Community Services. Thank you. So the first question, if you want to move to that slide, is if I can describe the staffing model in more detail. ECS does our supportive services staffing in supportive housing is person-centered, trauma-informed care, with the goal, as Ashley had stated, to stabilize people in supportive housing. And as she also indicated, there'll be one staff person, which is usually a social worker, to 17 residents, also with a site supervisor that is more of a clinical person. In supportive housing, you have supportive services, but you also have property management, and there'll be a property management team that'll be on staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that person will be at the front of the building in a, at the front desk of the property, signing folks in and out of the property. In addition to that, there'll be a live-in manager's unit, so someone will be on site as well. A second person in terms of the property management side of supportive housing that will be living there. There's also another piece of it that ECS specifically provides to communities, and that's community safety services. So that's a team that acts as a community liaison to prevent and de-escalate issues, both could be in the building if necessary, but also is working outside of the building to engage the community, engage tenants, and share information about the site as well as work within the community. So those folks are on foot, though they are not in a vehicle. Second question, can I describe the community safety services? I just talked about that a little bit, but to go into it further, it's an alternative to a traditional security model that you might be familiar with, like a security guard. These folks, though, they're not armed, and they generally are not going to be in a security uniform, but they'll be in clothing that identifies them as a community safety person. The community safety services team, as I was stating earlier, will take the time to engage in relationship building with nearby residents, business owners, volunteers, residents, and really working to foster trust and relationship within the community. And we'll be walking around the outside of the property, and will be the surrounding side of the property and down the street of the property, but will be within a reasonable amount of vicinity to the property. The staff will also engage with people in the immediate vicinity to support neighborhood beautification efforts. And that looks like if there's litter, garbage, things in the area, to identify that and pick it up, as well as engage in cleaning the area, identifying graffiti. ECS really takes pride in the properties that we own as assets within the organization. And we do an excellent job of ensuring that the property is spotless, and these folks help in that regard. Next question. So what happens if there's behavioral health issues on site? The residents of the building are subject to the same laws as all citizens and as community members. They do have the rights, responsibilities of a tenant. So folks that come into supportive housing, unlike a shelter or a navigation center, which is more temporary, and they usually engage in some type of program agreement, these folks actually sign a lease in their name, so they have the full rights and responsibilities of signing that lease. Residents who are in supportive housing are expected to follow the terms of their lease, but they're also expected to follow community guidelines, including a commitment to safety within the property, as well as on the outside of the property. Weekly meetings with other nonprofits is an important part of what Marin County does, and Ashley and her team work on to leverage countywide assistance and housing options if there is a significant issue with someone and that placement in that housing isn't working out. So being able to transfer folks to alternative units if that particular site is not a good site for that resident. As a last resort, of course, because the goal of supportive housing is to keep tenants housed. Residents with multiple unresolvable lease violations, as we're indicating, or any other serious infraction that's a violation of their lease may be terminated from the program. Next slide. So what happens if residents engage in illegal activities on site or nearby? Again, residents are subject to all of the same laws as all community members are. So we would expect, for folks that to be addressed accordingly. If residents do engage in illegal activities, they're subject to the legal process and afforded the same rights as anyone accused of a crime. And also that residents will not be subject to additional requirements or restrictions, nor will they be exempted from standard legal protections as well. Next question, I believe, is Ashley's.
It is, and I will take the sex offender question in a little bit more detail. This project is funded with HUD Housing Choice vouchers, which prohibit any household member subject to a lifetime registration requirement under a state sex offender registration program from being admitted to this program. We do not intend to apply additional restrictions to eligibility beyond what's mandated by HUD. This approach is consistent with what's called Housing First, which is an evidence-based practice that has been adopted by the county's Board of Supervisors in 2016 for all of our homeless programs and is also mandated by most funders, including the California Department of Housing and Community Development, which oversees the Home Key program. Next slide. The residents of the project will be members of the community and may choose as any residents of the neighborhood to use the public park next door. We all are invested in keeping that park a thriving community asset. ECS will have a community safety services team as best described. They will have an external presence. They will be community liaisons and will act as the eyes and ears outside of the facility. We do not anticipate that the property will impact the nearby bird sanctuary, and we do plan to build a fence between the property and the park. Next slide. Is this proposal a done deal? Ultimately, the Board of Supervisors will have to sign off on this project, but they have indicated support previously by authorizing the county to submit the Home Key proposal to the state and also for approving funds for pre-development costs. We anticipate finding out whether we've been funded sometime in late December or perhaps early January, and are moving forward, building relationships and gathering feedback from the community in meetings such as this one. Next slide. Up next, we will continue to work with the City of Larkspur's City Council liaisons. We will be continually updating the FAQs on the website, which again is 1251salicio.com, as listed here on the slide. HCD has said that they will complete their review of the application in roughly 45 days, and after the state approves it, if the state approves it, the Board of Supervisors will be required to approve the local matching funds at a date to be determined sometime after we find out if we've been funded. And we are also convening a community advisory group, which I will turn it back to Andrew to describe.
Thank you, Ashley. So what is the community advisory group? So as I mentioned earlier, we did have 2 successful Home Key projects in round 1, which was last year. One was in San Rafael, one was in Corte Madera. And in Corte Madera, there were also concerns about what the impact of the program might be. So the town of Corte Madera formed in conjunction with partnership with Opening Doors and the county, a community advisory group that's been now meeting for almost a year to make sure that the program is upholding the standards that everyone wants it to have to be successful. We are going to be launching a similar effort here with 1251 South Alicio. And we envision, again, just based on the questions that have been coming in, the feedback that's been coming in, we envision that this group will have a strong focus on safety in schools, the park next door, community engagement and communications, program development and metrics, and then again, also if there are exterior site improvements that can happen, also being open to that. Right now, planned community stakeholders that are going to be part of this group include the city, the county, ECS. We also have commitments from the Kentfield School District itself, Safe Routes to School, and the Central Marin Police Authority. At this point, we are trying to recruit roughly 5 to 6 at-large community members to also join the community advisory group. Technically, those applications are due tonight at midnight. So given that we were giving the presentation tonight and we don't want people have to stay up past this to do an application, we are going to just extend the deadline until tomorrow at 5 p.m. So again, if you visit the website and just community advisory group, the link below, you will see just a short application form that you can submit if you're interested in being part of the group. I will say at this point, we've received roughly 24 applications, most of which are actually residents that are within half a mile of the property. So a lot of very close local interest, which I think is going to make the project hopefully really successful. So that's our last FAQ. We do want to, again, turn it over to the public for any questions or comments. Just briefly on this, if you've used Zoom before, you might, or you haven't, at the very bottom, there's a bar of different options. There is a raise hand function. If you click the raise hand function, and I see some people have started to do it, you will appear in a queue, and I'll be able to unmute people to speak. We, again, are trying to end in a timely manner this evening, respecting everyone's time at 7:30. So our plan is to go till about 7:15 with public comment, but anyone that raises their hand, we want to make sure that you're heard tonight. We're going to go ahead and share a timer and shoot for about a minute of public comment. So just to cue everyone up, that's the general game plan. So I am going to stop sharing, and my colleague is going to put up.
Andrew, can I jump in for 1 second?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm depending on how many folks actually have questions or want to comment. I mean, I don't think we have to stick hard and fast to that 1 minute. We just wanted to make sure we have time and space for everyone. And then also I'll try to track on those questions that come in. And then we do have the questions that Superintendent Rose raised at the very top, and I'll add those to the list when we get back to the panel, sort of responding to the comments and questions that come up from the folks who are here tonight. Okay, sound good?
That sounds good. And because I think I can see this and other folks can't. We have about 50 attendees this evening, and at this point we only have 2 raised hands. So should we just allow?
Well, maybe folks could raise their hands if they think they're going to want to say something or speak in that. And then if I'm thinking we could just make it 2 minutes if not everyone is going to speak, but maybe everyone could try to keep it to 1, but if you roll over, don't worry about it.
That sounds good. And now we're up to about 4. So why don't we, do a little bit of audible. We were going to have a timer going, but let's not do that. If everyone could try to keep it to about 1 to 2 minutes. We're at about 5 hands now. So let's try to do that. And then we can bring up the timer if we're getting crunched for time. So with that, I will start with Jean, and then we'll go to Jessica. So Jean, you'll go first. And again, please try to keep it to about 1 to 2 minutes, and then we'll go to Jessica.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. So I have 2 girls at Basage. My in-laws live across the street from the proposed site. My dentist is there. We go to Hal Brown Park all the time. So this is a very, this area is our home and our backyard. And so I do have some concerns regarding this particular project. I think everybody here supports solving the homelessness problem, but not every project, I think, belongs in every community. So here are some of the concerns that were raised over the initial several sessions that you have had with the community members prior to today's session that I think have not been answered. And so I would like more clarification on this, since I think so with everybody else. One is, there were a lot of concerns of why people were being transferred from outside our current community that does not have a homelessness problem. And that was a big concern for a lot of people, because right now I'm not ashamed, and nor am I embarrassed by the fact that I love going by the bike path. I love walking by that whole area and not have to walk by an area that houses homeless people. And that was a big concern about from a lot of neighbors in the area, of why people are being transferred over from other areas of Marin County into our area. The second was, people had a lot of concerns about the size of the project and the fact that this project would house people of the highest needs. That was an exact quote that Andrew, I think you made. And that was a big concern for a lot of people. And there was no answers as far as why it had to be that way. Also, you guys mentioned that, having family housing would be problematic because it would take too long to create family housing. But the issue with that is that if that's the right thing to do, we should find a way to do it in the right span of time and not put 50 people, which is what you guys are proposing to do. A lot of neighbors had big concerns about the scope and size of the project, and mentioned that most of the neighboring condo units do not house 50 people, yet you are asking for 50 people to be placed, homeless people to be placed in this particular area. The other was the whole sex offender status. I won't go too much into this, but some of the comments really rubbed me the wrong way, where I believe it was Beth Stokes that mentioned, well, you could have a sex offender status if you urinate in public. Well, I'd like to know if there's a public urinator who may expose himself to my children at Hal Brown Park living in this particular facility. And I may not want, that person living in that facility. The other is that, a lot of people were really concerned that there was no community feedback that was allowed prior to this whole project moving forward. And in fact, I don't think a lot of people realize that this particular project is exempt from local zoning laws and does not need approval from the city of Larkspur. In fact, the city council member of Larkspur, Scott Kendall himself, said, this feels like you guys are shoving this project down our throats. And there's nothing that we can do about this. And this is exactly the definition, the blatant definition of shoving a project down the community's throat, when the community has no ability to vote, no ability to say no ability to provide actual feedback that would matter or would change the direction of the project. So, I think this is an undemocratic way of creating a project with such magnitude. Does require community to come together, and this is not the right way to do it. It requires the community's ability to be able to say yes or no and to vote on the project for in order to have a successful result.
Hey, Jean.
Thank you, Jean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you. So you've got Jean asked a whole bunch of questions. I wrote them down and we'll leave, and maybe some other folks have questions too. Jean, thank you for the questions.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jean. Next up, we have Jessica, followed by Richard. And again, let's try to keep it to about 1 to 2 minutes if we can. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Jessica,
Okay. So my name is Jessica Holman. I'm a pediatrician at the Marin Community Clinics. I work in the San Rafael site, but we do have a site which is like across the street from where this project would be, that serves mostly almost all adult patients. I've worked myself with many homeless people in Marin, and most of them are families because I'm a pediatrician. But I've talked with many of my colleagues about this project that work with only adults, and they've heard amazing things about this from clients or patients that they have that are in these communities. And a couple of my colleagues said, Jessica, you need to speak out in your local community because this is a really important thing, and it's been really great in other communities. And one of my colleagues said, there's been a lot of talk and concerns in other communities, and then when it's done, it turns out to be a great thing. I want to say thanks to Supervisor Rice, who I also heard speak in the Race Counts Forum this past week, who did a lot of addressing about housing difficulties in Marin. And it opened my eyes to the reason behind housing difficulties in Marin and how we're in a housing crisis right now. And I think it's really important that we in our community are part of supporting getting more housing for people in Marin. I think I understand a lot of concerns. I have 2 children at Basich as well that are 7 and 10, and they're young girls. But I'm not worried because I've heard there are so many wraparound services. I think people have a fear of what they see on the street of like a mentally ill person talking to someone and, yelling things out at people. And that's not what this is going to be. They're going to have wraparound services. They have their health care across the street. Like, we need to do this in order to help the chronically homeless and to help housing in general in Marin. I think there's going to be a big push coming up to do a lot of work on helping the housing crisis in Marin and more affordable housing in general. So I'm just really in support of this, and I think it's a great thing, and I feel proud that we would be able to be helping people in our own community. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing. I think we had Richard, and it looks like he lowered his hand. So let's move on to Amy, followed by Michelle. So Amy.
Hi there. Thank you guys for holding this. I think it's pretty much undisputed that the work you're doing is phenomenal. But as a parent, obviously the safety of my kids comes first and foremost. And I'm not, familiar with everything that you guys have done on a firsthand basis. And one of my big questions is, have you ever operated a property within the same distance to a school, especially an elementary school with young children and nursery school? Because we have, Marin Enrichment, Ross Valley, plus with Universal TK, we'll have kids as young as 4 at base age. And then we also have, as I'm sure you've already known and researched, plenty of kids from Kent that are riding bikes, walking, some alone through the park on their way to middle school, mostly unaccompanied by parents. So we obviously have, a vulnerable population in terms of children. And I just, can't help but worry. There's enough unknown risks in this world. And this is, however slight, a known risk. And I'm curious if you've had any other experience being this close to, a populated school. We have, I'm not sure how many kids between all of them, but I'm guessing it's close to 1,000. And what is the prior history? Because, I'm not sure that we want to experiment for the first time on this if we haven't already done the research prior to this.
Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing. Next up, we have Michelle, followed by Jeff. And Michelle, I am promoting you now.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fabulous. My name is Michelle Martinez. I live in Spyglass Hill condominiums, not far from South Alicio. I know the building well. The last operating business that was in that building, I happened to be the director of finance and IT. That was Marin Services for Women. People may be shocked to know, but for years we operated a recovery and addiction service center out of that building, where 40 women lived full-time and 170 outpatients visited with regular frequency. There was no trouble. There was no problem. I give that as background. I'm now the CFO, COO of a large nonprofit in Berkeley that does exactly these type of projects. So I'm intimately familiar with the statistics, the success rate of projects like these. It's actually not going to be, quote, a facility. It's going to be permanent supportive housing. This will not be a homeless shelter. These people will not be homeless anymore. The need in Marin is actually great. At one point, I was the CFO at Hospice by the Bay. We served people dying in their cars. So I'm a big supporter of this project. I've seen it work on numerous other fronts. In fact, my company is right now building a very similar project on the corner of Shattuck and Berkeley Way, which will open in May. 53 units, 12 dedicated to veterans, et cetera, et cetera. The model works, the model's safe, and a lot of the comments I'm seeing on Nextdoor and posters I've seen posted in my own neighborhood are concerning to me, because I think people don't really have all the facts and understanding. And I see a lot of fear. And while people might say, well, I don't think I'm practicing not in my backyard, that's exactly what they're practicing. And so thank you for taking on this project. I've seen Home Key work. I believe Home Key is the future. And I will be applying to the Community Group Advisory Board. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Michelle, for sharing your feedback. Next up, we have Jeff, and Jeff is currently the last hand up. So if anyone else wants to speak, feel free. I know we've gotten a lot of questions, which we can begin to respond to, but if anyone else like to speak again, please raise your hand. And Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I have a few questions, but I'll start and then I might have a comment. Why is the county not leasing this property to ECS? Seriously, think about how foolish and financially irresponsible this is. Who has performed an appraisal of this property? Explain how 100% of tax dollars, county, state, and federal, are being used to purchase and remodel this project then ECS is being transferred ownership to the property. If and when ECS sells the property, ECS will pocket the money. The money is not returned to the county, state, or government. Who's making that decision? That's one that just baffles me, okay? If the state and county do not need to abide by local community development guidelines, design review, environmental impact, and traffic studies, and or seek local community approval, how then is this not a complete government overreach and a loss of local control? And kind of my wise guy comment that I have for this is I live in a very nice house on a lot of property in Kent Woodlands, okay? What if I was to say, hey, look, why doesn't Project Home Key come buy my property for $11 million? Totally overvalued, and then turn around and build whatever they want here. And with zero input from the property owners association, the community, that my neighbors, there's zero respect for the people living here. That's exactly what's going on. You would not do that. It would be foolish. Why are you doing it with this property? Again, this is something that blows my mind. Anyway, there have been some news articles that have stated that the county is seeking additional home key funds for other projects that are yet to be determined. Have you identified any of those property locations as of yet? And then I'll finish. But how come the county isn't using the current county property that it has available? Why is the county focusing on placing these facilities in other cities versus right in their own county-owned property, such as where the tree farm is set up near the Civic Center and the Marin County Maintenance Yard, or on the backside of the county theater property? These locations would be closer and more transportation sites. There are 2 bus stops in these areas, less than 50 yards away, and the SMART train less than 100 yards away. There are no neighbors to disturb, and it would cost far less to develop these sites to tiny houses like they've done in Oakland and other cities. But again, I think what you guys are doing is foolish. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing that. We did have one other person raise their hand and then they lowered it. So why don't we, oh, okay, they raised it again. So we'll do Missy, you'll be next, and then maybe we'll turn it back to the staff team. And we've got a number of questions, so we'll answer some of those questions and then see what comes up. So Missy, I am promoting you now.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. So I have a 3rd grader that goes to Basich and walks in the bike path just blocks from this facility. And, you know, this is the first year that many of the 3rd grade moms are allowing their daughters to walk together to school and back on that bike path that's just blocks away from the facility. So I would also be very interested in, you know, will there be drug addicted, homeless people sheltered in this or permanently housed in this facility, mentally ill? I mean, I'm curious to know what, you know, how should we parents be feeling about our kids walking alone, you know, starting in 2nd and 3rd grade on that bike path near this facility, and any experience you've had or any precautions you'll be taking. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Missy. So with that, that concludes at least the hands that have been raised so far. So I'm going to turn it back to the team here. And again, a lot of good questions. Does anyone feel a strong desire to go first? Maybe Ashley?
I can jump in. Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Hey, could we start at the top? I wrote down all the questions that came up. But can we start with Raquel's questions, that the superintendent's questions? So her first question was about the profile and background of some of the prospective residents. And we had a couple other questions like that. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about who would be placed there and how. You talked about coordinated entry and what their age, physical status. The last questioner asked a good question about, what sort of conditions might people have that comes with them coming off the street or wherever they're coming from. And most of these people, I know all these people would be actually accepting this housing. Nobody is involuntarily placed in it. But so maybe a little bit of the process and how folks are chosen, Ashley, a little bit more, and then maybe Beth can talk a little bit more about the individuals and residents that you have in some of your other properties, which are going to be fairly typical of folks who would be placed in this site. And then lastly, I had another one's really related, but I'll get to it. I'll remember it in a second. Go ahead, you guys.
So in terms of how folks are selected and prioritized for the site, we use a standard assessment that folks experiencing chronic homelessness across the county complete, which helps us determine how vulnerable they are. We use permanent supportive housing like a medical intervention, and the folks that we're prioritizing for housing are quite frail. The assessment that we use looks at a wide variety of different factors, including how long somebody's been homeless, how old they are, certain medical conditions, whether they can meet their daily needs like food and clean clothes and things like that, whether they can navigate those systems, whether they have outstanding financial issues. I mean, it's a long list of things that we're looking at. And then beyond that, we're also looking at how many times they have received inpatient hospitalizations and the other one is how long they've been homeless, because the longer somebody's homeless, the more trauma they have and the more medically complex they tend to be. So the folks that we're seeing have multiple medical conditions. All of them have some kind of disability, whether that's physical disability. Yes, sometimes it's a mental health or substance use issue, though I will note that the incidence of mental health and substance use are not significantly higher in the homeless population than in the housed population. The vast majority of people nationwide who have substance use and mental health issues, even severe ones, are stably housed. And we do see, according to many, many different studies over 30 years, that placing people in permanent housing significantly reduces the effects of substance use and mental health issues. So I just want to make that very clear that this looks a lot different. Residents of this project will look a lot different from folks who are untreated and unhoused that you might walk by on the street.
And then Ashley, before we go to Beth, can you just speak to the, there was a question about that why or an assumption that folks were, why are people who are going to be housed, who's going to be housed in this housing, and where are they coming from in Marin County? I know we addressed the fact that most folks that come through the system have been longtime residents of Marin County, housed or unhoused, but then specifically from community to community. What does the point in time count tell us? And are there homeless folks in Larkspur? Are they necessarily going to be the ones that get this housing? How does that work?
Sure. Yes, there are homeless folks in Larkspur. In 2019, which is the last time we did a full point-in-time count census of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness, we counted 28 people in Larkspur. Those counts are known to be undercounts because it's difficult to find folks, and they're very good at being invisible. Folks who are experiencing homelessness in Marin, I think as someone mentioned at some point, about 75% of them have lived here for a long time. They lost their housing living here in Marin, and they are coming from all different communities. They come from Ross, they come from Greenbrae, they come from Novato, they come from Point Reyes Station, they come from Sausalito, from San Rafael, they come from all over the place. So just because there's not a large homeless population in Larkspur now doesn't mean that Larkspur and the lack of affordable housing countywide hasn't contributed to homelessness that is more visible in other locations. About a third of the folks that we've placed in permanent supportive housing over the last 4 years are seniors. They're over 55, which is you might expect given the aging population here in Marin. It's also very important to note that people who are experiencing chronic homelessness have a medical age about 25 years greater than their chronological age. So somebody who is 45 has the medical problems of somebody who is 70 who is experiencing chronic homelessness. So the population we're serving by and large quite fragile, and we see permanent supportive housing really is a medical intervention.
Yeah, so I can jump in with some, information related to the profile of residents who stay at ECS. We have about 1,800 units of supportive housing, and just some things to think about is that within our properties, those that have chronic illnesses are about 41% of the population. And those are physical health illnesses. We have about 46% that do have behavioral health illnesses. 31% have a physical disability. And about 37% have some type of substance use condition. In addition to that, we have about 74% that are, actively on Medicaid. And our average age, it can really range, but coming out of the COVID pandemic with 2 buildings that recently opened, it shows a much higher age, skewing to a higher age due to the vulnerability and the targeting of the aging population due to the health pandemic. And that was, one of the buildings was average of 67 years old, and another one was 58 years old. And but to Ashley's point, the general average age is around 49 years old coming into supportive housing on average of the buildings that we didn't just open. In addition to that, we have a lot of folks that participate in food-related programming. We have folks that really are in great need of food enhanced services within our properties. The homeless history for folks generally is on average, and again, this is average, is 6 years. So folks have been unhoused on average for 6 years prior to coming into supportive housing within ECS's property. The housing retention rate for ECS, within the first year is a little over 90%, and that's our goal. That's why we do the work, is to keep people stably housed. In addition to that, folks stay in supportive housing on average about 4 years. And so, but that is a average of over 1,800 units. On some properties, we have folks that have lived in the property, our first property that was built across the street from me in 1993. Some of those folks are still there today and remain in that housing. So actually a significant percentage of them are still there from 1993. And that is the goal of supportive housing, is to keep people housed. It is their home. It's where they live and become part of the community. So that's just also average rent generally for folks in supportive housing is $435 a month. And their average income usually is, our average income is a little over $900 a month for the population. And that's generally going to be, received through benefits.
Okay. All right. So the next question that Raquel asked, and it's related to a couple other ones that came up, was why this specific location? Why 1251 Alicio and not somewhere else? And also, is there are there other Project Home Key sites that have been identified? And then lastly, we can get to why not on some other county property or other property. So I'm not sure who should answer that.
I mean, I'll say this, I think it's a combination, but ECS can start with Kevin in the work that we were doing to identify sites.
Hi, Kevin Kitchenham, Director of Housing Development at Municipal Community Services. Thank you for being here tonight. Yes, we looked at a lot of different sites, over 20 throughout the county. 5 of those sites were presented to us through what's known as the request for information process, where those were actually advertised through the county or presented to the county as possible options. Without going into each site individually, there's a panoply of issues with the sites in general that South Alicio did not have. So, for example, one of those sites was on a hillside that was unimproved on a fire access road, not really a great site for a rehab, and is going to be a new construction and a very difficult new construction play. Another site was an office conversion that was already in contract when we started to look for sites. So we had a lot of different issues with a number of different sites. One of those issues was also where those sites were located in relationship to areas of concentrated poverty. HUD would not allow us to they would not pay vouchers for sites in those areas. It's part of their policy. So we had a lot of geographic concerns, socioeconomic concerns, and just there's also the developability of a property. So all things being equal, it kept coming back to South Alicio as a lot of the features that we would need and amenities we'd like to build into permanent supportive housing were sort of naturally there. So there was this almost affordability by design element to South Alessio. The units themselves, the ability to have the disability access corridors, both in the other disability access features do, being grab bars in the bathrooms and wide enough doorways, reach ranges for electrical outlets. So a lot of the things, expensive items design-wise, we'd be looking to build in to a building or design into a building, were naturally existing at this site. So that's the main reason to move forward. And it'll meet the rehab timelines for Homekey as well. So confluence of funding and goodness of fit by way of constructability. So I think
the question
Supervisor, good. I know it jumps us ahead to a question was asked later, but since Kevin's speaking about the property now, maybe he could answer the question about the price and why we're paying the price we are, or proposing to pay the price we are.
Yes, can you speak to the appraisal and the price and the questions around the financing?
Sure. Our understanding of the site was that this was actually a second price cut to this property. We did engage with an appraiser, and they came back with an as-is value of $11 million. So we have had a professional appraiser certified under U.S. appraiser standards perform that appraisal. We were in negotiation with the seller before that, and this just confirms where we're at. So now we're just working through the end of that due diligence. As far as a comparable analysis, it's right within the mid-range of that property type in the area. In the comparables analysis we were provided in initial due diligence. So we felt good about the price per square foot, given the building's quality, has a lot of the building systems intact. I know it looks rough, but that was the reason for the initial price discount. And, in real estate, quite often you're looking, a willing seller is a very important piece to this. And this seller was willing to engage with government funding timelines. So I think it's a confluence of willing seller and the appraisal meeting the market standard.
Great, thank you, Kevin. And either Ken or Kevin, could you speak to the question about the relationship between the county and ECS and why not leasing to ECS? And then I want to get back to some of the other questions that were asked. Kevin, I don't know who's best to answer that.
I can take it. So just typically the county does not own and operate housing. It's not something that we're experts at, and we rely on experts to do that. Our model has always been to partner with nonprofit developers and operators to create and run affordable and permanent supportive housing. This is a standard model in our industry. It's a standard model that the state of California is expecting under Project Homekey. This is happening across the state. It's not something unique to Marin, where Marin County's being deficient in our duties and pawning property off to an organization outside of the county. It is the standard.
If I can just add on to that, I'm sorry. The Homekey funds themselves, I think there was a question about sort of length of tenure of ECS in this property. The Homekey funds themselves have a 55-year deed restriction. So we'll be looking at that as an initial standard. And if, and in discussions with the county, we'll probably match onto those restrictions as well. So that'll be a minimum income restricted period that we'll operate this property. So I think that sort of speaks to that longer tenure permanency.
Great.
And I can speak briefly to the question about why not existing county properties. And the very brief answer is that most of those counties are currently unimproved, and Homekey is really targeting rehabilitation rather than new construction. The timelines do not permit for new construction of facilities.
Okay, so the other question that Raquel asked, and it's come up many times, but need to go more into it, is why not family housing for this property instead of individual housing?
If I can take that question. Really, the biggest issue is simply the volume of renovations that would need to be completed at this project to make it suitable for families is not feasible in the Homekey timeframe. We have to have renovations completed within 12 months of award. So if we're awarded in December, we're looking at closing maybe sometime in January and needing to be completely finished with renovations by the end of next December. And if anybody has tried to do any renovations or a kitchen remodel or anything in the last couple years, you'll know that that's challenging in pandemic times. So it's really not possible to do that level of renovations. In addition, it would impact the operating cost that we would see with the vouchers, the amount of money that would be available for operations. It complicates things massively on a number of different areas. And additionally, we've had the question about why couldn't we do some families and some single adults? And really, it's perfectly appropriate in some contexts to mix single adults and families in projects. We've done that at the Fireside in Mill Valley, for example, but it's not appropriate for a building like this. This is a single building. It's all connected with just one or two areas of common space. A project like the Fireside is a larger apartment complex with separate areas for families and for seniors, because they're populations with different needs. You have to create separate spaces for children, and it's not, this property does not lend itself at all to serving families. It was designed to serve single adults in its original conception, and it's a better fit for that population now.
Okay, Amy asked, has ECS ever operated a property as close to an elementary school or a nursery school? And then maybe you can also just talk more about what ECS will be doing to address or preventatively to ensure that there's no safety issues that may come up.
Yeah, well, I think what I can say about the buildings that we operate, we right now are surrounded by preschools. And right now around us, we have the Academy Preschool. We have a preschool literally across the street from us. We also have another preschool down the street from this particular property. We're currently finishing a site that is next to the Ninth Circuit Courthouse with a preschool that operates within that courthouse. We have a property next to the or not far from the Cathedral School for Boys. And we are now leasing up a property currently that is, blocks from the Bessie Carmichael preschool through 8-year-olds. And that's just a very quick review of preschools and other, high schools and schools like that I can see. I know there's more around us, but we are quite used to operating property supportive housing near schools and within communities, near residences, near HOAs, near apartment buildings, near single family homes within San Francisco. So in terms of safety, ECS works really hard with support services on site. Folks that come into supportive housing meet with us, and we work with them, on their care coordination and trying to address the issues that they have to be, within this housing. To be eligible for this housing, folks are going to come in with disabling conditions, and that's what we're focused on, as well as meeting basic needs like ensuring that folks have food and things like that. So our case management staff are there, during the day, and again, that staffing ratio really depends on the funding source. But in Marin County, as Ashley was stating, it's 1-17, which is a great ratio that Marin County provides to nonprofits. Our supportive housing staff really work closely with a person-centered trauma-informed approach. So we're really working with folks who come in to the property who have experienced trauma. We are well-trained in de-escalation. And we work very closely hand in hand with property management. Property management is on site 24/7, identifying any issues that might come up on a property, like, for instance, flooding. Someone might accidentally or maybe intentionally, flood their sink or their toilet. And, we have to address those issues immediately. Someone might get into an argument with a neighbor. And these are usually events that occur internal to the building, not external to the building. Our efforts to address and support the community external to the building is the community safety services that ECS, is committing to provide. And those are not, services that ECS is, typically reimbursed for in our work. And so we think it's important to ensure that we have folks walking up and down the blocks, engaging people that, might not live in the property, but might be unhoused, right? And try and engage them and try and figure out what resources they need and provide a linkage to those resources, because we do know what resources are available. And so we really try and lend our expertise when it comes to folks that are unhoused in the community that aren't on the property, to the community. And so we do that in San Francisco. We're in community advisory groups with other properties, with other, neighbors and HOAs, and a multitude of other, community members that are in those community advisory groups. And in those situations too, we've committed to, funding with our partners, with the city and county community safety services. And it has shown to, make a significant difference in terms of engaging folks who are not living on the property. I just need to be clear about that, but not living in the property, who may be loitering in the area, who may have littered, or who may be unhoused and just, hanging out, on a bench. And, these folks are trained to go and engage them and try and mitigate the situation that's occurring.
So Beth, one more question. So I'm thinking about and maybe this is a question for Andrew, the community advisory committee.
Sure.
Was I'm thinking about the questions around kids going to and from school and safe routes. And my office works a lot with the school on the safe routes programs. We want people walking and biking to school, but
sure.
Is this an area that the community advisory group could work on, and potentially in partnership, actually, or in tandem with the your on-site community, your on-site service people, especially I'm thinking during school commute hours when folks are walking up and down the street?
Yeah, I think it's, it's an excellent point. I think that, you provide those, services when people are there's going to be high traffic, times. And for this property, we do definitely believe that'll be actually in the, late afternoon, mid-afternoon, late afternoon, early evening. Not necessarily, at 12 o'clock at night, unlike some of our other properties where we do have services that go well into late into the evening, just due to the traffic of that area. So we make adjustments, in terms of what the community's feedback is. I have sat and watched the traffic and the after school hours to see what that looked like. And it's definitely, we understand it's a busy area. It's a busy area with the medical services across the street. And we also, want to ensure that everyone in that neighborhood, in that area, is able to safely egress and ingress out of driveways, across the sidewalks, pulling into the bike lanes, and addressing and looking at the existing construction that's currently happening on that block, and ECS being aware of that and going to work very hard to ensure that we're not, we don't, contribute to what's already happening, in terms of park vehicles and construction park vehicles currently on that block during the daytime. So that's all part of the conversation in a community advisory, meeting. It's to address issues of lighting. It's to address issues of visual sight, in the area, and just to ensure that we're, communicating, addressing, responding, and also doing what we know to do to ensure that the site is safe, well lit, and watching very carefully what's happening on the block as we're currently doing.
And just to add briefly, I did mention during the presentation, but we do have confirmed representation already from Safe Routes to School, from the school district itself, and just from the applications that have come in. I know we already have parents that have applied. So our intention is to make sure that we have that representation as part of the committee. We hear loud and clear that this is a priority. And so that will definitely be a work stream of our group. Supervisor Rice, I did want to note, I know we're getting close to our original 7:30 time. We have two hands up. I think one person spoke before, but one person did not. Should we allow the person that did not speak before to share?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, why don't we do that? Richard, I will turn it over to you, and then we'll go back to Supervisor Rice.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, I had my hand up earlier, but I had to give my kid a bath, so I had to take a pause. But I just wanted to ask one thing. I heard something. I've worked with homeless for years, and with Housing First Project, and the solution to homelessness is obviously housing, right? So housing first, and then work on the other issues as you can. But one thing I heard at the beginning was I really thought you were going to build all new units. I don't know where I got that. I thought there were going to be new units. It sounds like it's a rehabilitation of the project, but do they not have their own kitchens and their own baths in the unit? I mean, because I think that's really important to create that sort of their own space.
Yeah, so great question. And also when that question gets answered by Kevin or whoever pretty succinctly, also maybe just speak a little bit more to the communal rooms that are also in addition to the apartments and the courtyard space as well.
Sure. Thank you, Supervisor. The goal is to provide not only private bathrooms with a private tub, rather, that was the last change, with a kitchenette in the unit. So that is the goal, to have sort of what functions as a studio. So it is not new construction. I'm sorry. New construction just doesn't lend itself to this timeline. So that's what we have as far as the units. And I'm sorry, there was a second part of that question that cut out. So
yeah, there's 2 interior courtyards that the residents will be able to access. We are seeking to beautify those courtyards to make them a very peaceful place for folks, for residents in the housing. So they'll be able to access private interior courtyards, 2 of them within the interior of the property. In addition to that, folks will have laundry on site. They're going to have a community kitchen on site. They'll also have a community room and a dining area, to engage in social activities as well as shared meals and things like that, and group therapy and things that we typically will do when working with folks in supportive housing. So we are very cognizant of shared space. We work really hard to ensure that there is shared space, because the units are good size, but folks, we don't want them to isolate and want them to come out and engage in, community activities. So we are working on those shared spaces in the building, which the building does lend itself to having quality shared space available in the interior of the building.
Right, and I think I would add, having been on the site and gone to a site tour, and we will be offering site tours mostly for neighbors, but certainly this community advisory group will get in a site tour early. The layout of this property really lends itself to privacy for the residents, and also a lot of a sense of its own space without intruding on the rest outside of the community. It's set back from the main street. There's a large parking lot. From what I understand, you don't anticipate very many of these residents actually to have their own cars. And then also the other thing about this property that folks may want to know is the primary entrance and exit of the property are the front doors, on the main front doors. The apartments for each of the individuals are accessed from the interior of the building. So anybody who's coming or going, any of the residents coming or going, or staff coming or going in and out through those front doors that are right on the street. So it's, anyway, just it feels like a very manageable property, and it was, prior to being Marin Services for Women shelter, it was a skilled nursing facility. So that's why the size is what it is. It can accommodate that many people. And frankly, it was built and through the land use zoning for this kind of use, frankly. I do want to get to a couple other things that came up, mainly around the process and sort of decision making. And yes, this is Home Key is a state program, and the way it was designed, it does take some of the discretion away from the local community. The project in Corte Madera, the Corte Madera Town Council did not have any decision-making approval over it, but we tried to work really closely with them and with the community advisory group to make sure that it would work for that community. And the same goes for this program. And so we have been engaging with the city of Larkspur, the town of Larkspur, and we're forming this community advisory group towards really making sure that nearby neighbors and stakeholders not only understand it, but are part of providing input towards making suggestions to making sure this is as successful as it can be. Ultimately, as Ken said, or Andrew said, I can't remember, or Ashley said, the Board of Supervisors will have to approve receiving these grant monies or any allocations we have to make. We won't take that action until we know that we've actually, that the Home Key project this project has been awarded monies from the state. But it does come down to the Board of Supervisors, giving the stamp of approval. And I don't anticipate that coming to us until January. But I can tell folks who are on this call, I'm very supportive of this project. I think my colleagues are as well, but I can't speak for them. But given what I've learned about not only the need to address homelessness in our county, in our community, and what I've learned about these kinds of residential sites that work on a housing first basis, and having met people who have come from being homelessness to reside in some of these places, I have a high comfort level that this can absolutely be a success for not only the folks who would be living here, but also for the community at large and the neighbors at large. And I might not feel as confident and as comfortable as I do if we're this 20 years ago, when I had kids in school who, and a project like this had been proposed near my neighborhood. Knowing what I knew then, I wouldn't be as comfortable as I am today. But I have a lot of confidence. The ECS has a lot of experience. We have hundreds of individuals housed throughout the county who were formerly homeless in scattered site housing in projects like Victory Village in Fairfax, up at New Beginnings in Novato, which is actually pretty near a school. I think Ken's kids walk right by every day. So we know well-run, well-sited, well-supported projects like this are assets for the folks who live there and can be assets for the community as well. So I appreciate all the parents, the concerns that you have, neighbors' concerns, and the goal is to work with you to ensure we make this successful and to keep folks engaged and to make sure we don't have problems or issues. And if anything does come up, that those issues are addressed. So this won't be the last opportunity to speak with me or to learn more about the project. But this one was specifically for the Kentfield school community and neighboring schools. I will be staying in touch with Raquel and with the Board of Trustees. And I encourage folks to go to the project website that has a thorough FAQ. I encourage folks to apply for the Community Advisory Committee if you want to participate, and also participate in any future meetings that I may host, or to contact me directly through my email, which is pretty easy to find. So Andrew, if you could just repeat really slowly the website for the South Alicio project, the information and anything else that I may have missed. And I think we hit most of the questions, and if we didn't, I'll circle back and we'll provide information to Raquel that she can then push out to the community. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you project team. I know you've been going extra hours supporting getting this information out. So thank you again for being here tonight.
Absolutely. And just for everyone, that website is www.1251SELISEO. So 1251SELISEO.com. And there's the FAQ and the application for the community advisory group.
All right. Good night, everyone. Raquel, thank you again for being here. Have a good evening.
Good night. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.